I'm Lucia, 26, and the day I sat down for family dinner, everything in my life changed. I didn't throw a scene. I didn't break a glass. I just asked a simple question about a reunion. And my brother, who always prided himself on being composed, snapped so hard the truth we'd buried for years clawed its way to the surface. By dessert, I had a plan. By the reunion, I had my revenge. The casserole still hissed when my mother set it down, and I swear the steam smelled like every Sunday of my childhood: basil, garlic, and the warmth of a house that pretended secrets were seasoning. Dad poured the wine a little too carefully, like the bottle might judge him for the way his hand shook. My sister Chloe scrolled under the table, pretending to smile at jokes she wasn't reading. And Ethan, my older brother by 4 years, carved into the roast as if it had personally disappointed him. "Pass the salad, Lou," Mom said without looking at me. She never looked at me first. I cleared my throat, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, and said lightly, "So, when's the reunion?" The room froze. Forks paused midair. The grandfather clock coughed out a single disapproving tick. It wasn't a trick question. Our extended family throws a reunion every other August, and this year it was at Aunt Nora's lake house. We used to spend summers there when secrets still fit in pockets and not entire rooms. Ethan set the carving knife down like he might throw it. "You're not coming," he said. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "You heard me." He tightened his jaw. "It's family." My laugh came out soft, dangerous. Then I must have misunderstood what I am. Chloe's eyes ping-ponged between us. Dad inhaled to speak, then exhaled differently, a surrender I'd come to recognize. Mom fussed with a napkin until it became a rope. "Ethan," Mom murmured. "Not at the table." "Where then?" I asked, my voice steady. "In the garage? On the front lawn? Should I hang a sign that says Lucia has been quiet long enough?" He stood up so quickly his chair shot back and knocked the wall. "Don't play victim. Not after what you did." There it was, the ghost we ate dinner with year after year. Grandma Evelyn's ring, the sapphire one with the tiny crescent scratch near the setting, visible only if you knew exactly where to look. The ring that disappeared the night of Cousin Grace's wedding 3 years ago. The night my whole life rerouted from daughter to suspect, from sister to exile. The night Ethan testified with his silence. I held his stare and said nothing. Not a denial. Not an apology. Silence, too, could be a blade. Mom reached for my plate to serve me, a performance of normalcy. "Let's all eat before it gets cold." "No," I said, not loudly, but it sliced cleanly through the room. "We can eat when you answer me. When is the reunion?" Ethan's mouth twisted. "You're not invited, Lucia." "Then why did Aunt Nora call me last week to confirm my RSVP?" He blinked hard, once, then again, and I watched realization gallop across his face. There was a new variable in play, one he hadn't accounted for. I wasn't alone anymore. I speared a tomato. "I'll bring dessert," I added, smiling. "Something sweet enough to cut through all this." He sat down slowly. For the first time, I saw fear around the edges of his confidence. He knew what I knew. He just didn't know how I knew it. It began 6 months earlier, on an evening when grief drifted in from an unexpected direction. I'd stopped by Mom's to return a casserole dish, because for years that's all we exchanged. Tupperware, weather updates, and the kind of affection that never looked me in the eye. Mom was upstairs, muttering to herself as she sorted old photos and boxes of costume jewelry. She'd been cataloging things since Grandma Evelyn died, a meticulous, sorrowful ritual. "Careful with that," she said when I reached for a velvet case on the dresser. The case was small, expensive by weight alone. It should have held the sapphire ring. Instead, it cradled a meticulous replica, excellent to the untrained eye, tragically obvious to anyone who'd spent childhood on Evelyn's lap, tracing the crescent scratch with a fingertip while she told stories about surviving, about starting over, about not letting men rewrite you. My blood went cold. "This isn't hers," Mom's mouth pressed into a line. "It's the best we could do. It looks close enough for pictures." "Pictures of what?" "A lie?" She closed her eyes. "Lucia." "It was him," I said. Not a question. The way her shoulders dropped told me everything. Mom hadn't just suspected, she knew. The day Grandma's ring vanished, Ethan had shown up sweaty, shaking, with a story about not seeing me near the bridal suite. But you know how she gets. He sat with me during the police questions, dabbed my tears, whispered that it would blow over. And when it didn't, when everyone gave me the kind of kindness that felt like quarantine, He stayed quiet, the silent engine behind my ostracism. Now Mom stood in front of a neat pyramid of photo albums like a sentry, protecting the story their family had chosen instead of the truth. There was a lot going on then, she said. Your brother was struggling. With what? Morals? She flinched. Money, bad investments, stupid risks, she swallowed. Debts. And so he sold Grandma's ring and let me take the fall? No one said that? No one had to. I opened the replica case again, forcing her to look. Who bought this? Who is pretending this is our history? Mom sank onto the edge of the bed. Your brother promised he'd fix it. He was scared. He said he'd replace it and it would be like it never happened. But it did happen, I said, heart pounding. To me, she buried her face in her hands. If your father found out, he'd what? Grow a spine? It came out harsher than I meant, but when you've been uninvited from your own life, words sharpen to survive. Lucia, please, she whispered. I'm trying to keep this family together. I looked at the replica, the shining monument to everyone's fear, and felt a switch flip inside me. I had been patient. I had been silent. I had been the good daughter waiting for apologies that never arrived. I snapped the case shut. Let's try honesty for a change. Revenge doesn't start with fireworks. It starts with folders. It starts with lists and late nights, and the quiet, gorgeous moment when fear becomes fuel. I made a whiteboard in my tiny apartment and wrote 3 questions at the top. Where did the ring go? Who knew and when? How do I make them say it out loud? Aunt Nora was the first ally. She'd raised 3 boys, run a real estate office, and treated truth like oxygen. When I told her what Mom had admitted, Nora listened without interrupting once, then said in that flat way she had, I always did think the timing was cute. What timing? Ethan's new car. He bought it the week after Grace's wedding. Cash. I stared. Are you serious? He said it was a bonus, Nora said, rolling her eyes. From what? Impressing the mirror? I let it slide because your mother looked like she'd swallowed glass for dinner. She exhaled. What do you need from me, Lou? A copy of the reunion guest list, I said. And a microphone, she grinned. My girl. Next, Grace. It felt risky, talking to the bride whose wedding became my trial. Grace surprised me by hugging me at the door like we were still kids whispering secrets in the attic. I wanted to call you 100 times, she said into my hair. But Mom kept saying it would only make it worse. Worse than being cut out? She looked away. I'm sorry. Help me make it right, I said, and told her everything. Grace, who always had a camera in her hand, went digging. She found digital photos from that night that the official photographer never used. In one candid, Ethan's then-fiancée Sophie clutched a clutch purse so small it couldn't have held a ring box. But the caption timestamps gave us a map of people and windows, of when the bridal suite door opened and closed. Grace also remembered the jeweler. Grandma took the sapphire to Dawson and Reed last spring for a prong repair, she said. Maybe they keep records? They did. The store manager, Mr. Reed, remembered Evelyn clear as day. She flirted with me like I was Sinatra. He also remembered something else. We logged a call 3 days after Grace's wedding, he said. A man asked about the ring's resale value. I refused to discuss over the phone. Did he give a name? Not his, Mr. Reed said. But the call came from a number we had in our system for a previous appraisal, Ethan Marlowe. I gripped the counter to steady myself. The room brightened and hissed, like the world had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. Can you provide a letter stating that? We'll draft a statement, he said. If the family wants to set this right, Miss Marlowe. The family. What a beautiful, broken word. I tracked down the car. The dealership confirmed the cash purchase and the date, 8 days after the wedding. I found court records that weren't criminal but were humiliating. Collection suits, past due notices. A pattern. I gathered it all. Not to destroy him, I told myself, but to force the truth to breathe. Then I did something I'd never had the courage to do. I called Sophie, no longer Ethan's fiancée. They'd married quietly the winter after the scandal, a celebration I was not invited to attend. She answered on the second ring. Lucia? Surprise, not warmth. I need to ask you something, I said, keeping my voice even. Did you ever see Grandma Evelyn's sapphire ring after the wedding night? Silence, then. Why? Because your husband is about to lie himself into a corner. A long exhale. Meet me, she said, and sent me an address for a cafe on the edge of town that tasted like endings. Sophie arrived in oversized sunglasses and grief. "You should know," she began without greeting. "I told Ethan to tell the truth. I begged him. He promised he would handle it." She swallowed. "By handle it, he meant blame you by omission. Did you see the ring?" "I saw the box," she said. He opened a drawer in his study and shoved it inside like it might bite him. I asked what it was. He said, "A mistake." 2 days later, the box was gone. "And I didn't stop him," she said, voice cracking. "We were drowning in debt he hid from me, too. He said he'd make it right. He never did. Will you put that in writing?" I asked. "A statement." "You'll be protected." She looked out the window. "I don't want to set him on fire." "You'd be turning on the lights?" Her hands trembled. "Send me the template," she said. "I'll sign." I left the cafe shaking, not from fear, but because I could feel the gears of something huge finally clicking where they belonged. Not everything I needed was in a letter or a ledger, though. One piece would come from Ethan himself, so I called him. He didn't pick up the first time or the second. On the third, he answered with a bark. "What?" "It's me," I said. "I know about the ring, a beat." Then a laugh, dry, exhausted. "You think you do? I have the jeweler's call log. The dealership receipt for your car. Sophie's statement." The laugh vanished like a match in rain. "What do you want, Lucia?" "What's mine?" I said. "And my place in this family back." "I can't undo what people think," he muttered. "You made them think it." He inhaled sharply. "I was going to fix it. You had 3 years." He didn't answer. Finally, he said, "Don't show up at the reunion." The line went dead. And that's how we got to dinner. Me asking about the reunion like it was weather. Ethan telling me I wasn't family, and Mom pretending the salt shaker deserved CPR. They were all waiting for me to erupt, to confirm their suspicion that I was the problem. Instead, I smiled and said I'd bring dessert, because I was done asking for a seat. I was building the table. Aunt Nora's lake house wore August the way some people wear joy, effortlessly. The lawn rolled down to a dock where cousins used to race to push each other into water so cold it felt like a dare. Strings of lights were already up when I arrived in a navy dress and a calm I'd ironed like linen. People stared. A few whispered. Cousin Hannah hugged me like we hadn't been taught there were parts of me we didn't touch. Inside, the dining room gleamed with polished wood and polished lies. A slideshow played on the far wall, our childhoods in pixels. Dad stood near the bar, posture crumpled, pretending to debate sodas. He looked at me, then quickly looked away as if I were a solar eclipse. "Ready?" Aunt Nora asked, appearing at my elbow like a guardian angel with blunt bangs. "As I'll ever be." She nodded toward the dessert table. At the center sat a white box. Inside were a dozen tarts, a sapphire blue glaze gleaming on top. I had baked them myself quietly all week. They were not subtle. Neither was I anymore. "Attention, everyone," Nora called, clinking her glass. "Before we eat, I've asked Lucia to say a few words. It's been too long since we heard her voice in this room." Conversation stalled, then stopped. Ethan stood near the mantel, arms crossed, eyes daring me to try. I stepped forward, the white box now in front of me like an altar. "I brought dessert," I said. "But first an appetizer." "The truth," a few people laughed nervously. I let the silence stretch until it became a bridge I could walk across. 3 years ago, I began. At Grace's wedding, Grandma Evelyn's ring disappeared. I paused, tasting the word. Suspected. Not officially, of course. We're far too polite for something as messy as charges. Instead, we had whispers. We had avoidance. We had a family group chat that forgot I existed. Several heads lowered. Grace stood a little straighter. "I didn't take the ring," I said. "Here's who called the jeweler about its value 3 days later." I handed Nora the first letter. She read the line aloud. "Call logged from number registered to Ethan Marlowe. Call logged from number registered to Ethan Marlowe." Ethan's face hardened. "This is ridiculous. And here," I continued, "is a receipt for a car purchased in cash 8 days after the wedding." I projected the document. Aunt Nora had set up a screen and a basic slideshow for me, labeled simply Memories. The room murmured. "And here," I said, holding up another page, "is a signed statement from Sophie that she saw the ring box in Ethan's study after the wedding." Sophie stood pale. "It's true," she said, voice trembling. I should have said something sooner." Mom swayed where she stood, one hand clamped to her mouth. Dad gripped the back of a chair like he was the one on trial. Ethan took a step toward me. You're trying to humiliate me. I'm trying to free myself. I met his gaze. But if you want mercy, earn it. Tell the truth. He opened his mouth, then closed it. The room went utterly still. No? I asked softly. Then I will. I turned back to the crowd. Ethan had debts, bad ones. He sold the ring or arranged for it to be sold. Mom found out after and let a replica stand in its place. Everyone figured the quietest solution was the kindest. I let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in my ribs for 3 years. It wasn't. I lifted the lid of the dessert box. The sapphire tarts glistened. Grandma's stories always ended with a lesson, I said. Mine does too. If you let a lie sit at the table, it will eat everything. Ethan swallowed. Fine, he muttered, hands shaking. Fine. He looked at Dad, then at Mom, then at me. I sold it. The room gasped. He rushed on. I was going to replace it before anyone noticed. I was in over my head. Lucia? I thought if I stayed quiet, it would blow over. I nodded once. You didn't just stay quiet, Ethan. You let me drown. He wiped at his face in a motion that wasn't quite a denial and not yet an apology. I'm sorry, he whispered, and then louder to the room. I'm sorry. I was a coward. Mom cried openly now, and when Dad reached for her hand, something unspooled in me I hadn't expected. Relief so pure it hurt. Aunt Nora cleared her throat. There's one more thing, she said, eyes kind. She turned to me and placed something small and heavy in my palm. The sapphire winked up at me, the crescent scratch catching the light like a wink. I stared. How? Mr. Reed's letter was persuasive, Nora said, smiling. And some people can be convinced to return what never belonged to them if they realize the family is done being polite. The ring was warm from her hand. I pressed it to my heart and closed my eyes. When I opened them, the room was crowded with expressions too complicated to name. Shame, love, fear, hope. The truth had not blown us apart. It had arranged us differently. Ethan took a step forward. Lucia, I held up a hand. I'm not ready to forgive you. His face fell, but I kept going. But I'm ready to stop pretending this didn't happen. That's the only path to anything, he nodded. I'll make it right. You can start by telling Grandma's story yourself the next time someone asks where the ring was, I said. And by paying back Aunt Nora for the persuasion, Nora snorted. With interest, the room exhaled. A few cousins clapped, awkward but sincere, like we were all learning how to applaud truth for the first time. I replaced the lid on the box and lifted it toward Ethan. Dessert? I asked. Sapphire tarts. Sweet but honest. He took one with a shaky laugh. You always did have a flair for symbolism. Must run in the family, I said, glancing at the ring. We ate. We talked, really talked for the first time in years. Mom, Margaret, when she needed to be someone besides Mother, took my hands and sobbed apologies into my fingers. Dad, Daniel, careful with feelings the way he was with knives, told me he'd been wrong to disappear inside his own disappointment. Chloe squeezed me so tightly my ribs protested. Grace raised a glass and said, To Lucia, who brought the weather and cleared the sky. Later, when the dock creaked beneath our feet and the water stitched the moon into silver squares, Ethan joined me at the railing, hands shoved in his pockets like he wanted to hide them from himself. I'll sell the car, he said. Pay Nora back. Make a public apology at the next family meeting. He swallowed. And I'll start going to meetings for my gambling. Sophie's been... She deserves better. So do you, I said, and meant it in the most complicated way possible. We stood quietly for a while, listening to the night behave like a night and not a courtroom. After a bit, he said, You always were good at endings. This isn't one, I said, turning the ring over in my fingers. It's a correction, he laughed softly. You gonna keep that? I slid the ring onto a chain around my neck, the one that once held a tiny brass key to a diary I no longer owned. It's Grandma's. I'm preventing further adventures. He nodded. Good. Ethan, I said, and he looked at me like he was ready to flinch. Next time I ask about a reunion, I added gently, just tell me when it is. He closed his eyes, relief and regret wrestling for a home on his face. August 21st, he said. Every other year, always. We went back inside together. The lights were softer now, as if the house itself had unclenched. Aunt Nora queued up a new batch of photos. No more skipping over me like a glitch. In picture after picture, I watched us grow, fight, forgive, try again. The ring glowed against my skin, a story that decided not to end in theft but in accounting. Not everyone hugged me. Not everyone apologized. Families don't pivot on a dime. But the axis had tilted, just enough for the future to roll toward something I could live in. When I left, Mom followed me to the porch. "I don't deserve your kindness," she whispered. "Then don't call it kindness," I said. "Call it a boundary that happens to leave room for you." She smiled wetly. "You got that from Evelyn." "I got everything from Evelyn," I said, touching the chain. "Even the stubbornness." "Especially the stubbornness," she said, and for the first time in 3 years, we both laughed without choking on it. On the drive home, the ring lay warm against my heart, steady as a metronome. I thought about how revenge had sounded to me when everything was still sharp, fire and spectacle. But mine had been a quieter architecture. Gather the truth, build a stage, invite the audience, and let the liar decide whether to perform or confess. I hadn't burned the house. I'd opened the windows. By the time I pulled into my apartment lot, my phone had filled with messages, some apologies, some explanations, some confessions about who knew what and when. I didn't respond to them all. I didn't have to. I had said my piece in a room that once evicted me from the narrative, and I had been heard. I went inside, hung the ring on the lamp by my bed where it bathed the room in blue, and wrote down the last line of the story I wanted to remember. You can't control what they say about you when you're not at the table, but you can build a new table and make them pull up a chair, and that's exactly what I did. If you felt that, if you've ever been blamed for something you didn't, do or silence to keep the peace, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear that truth is louder than shame. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done at that reunion? Would you have gone louder? Or quieter? Because sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't a scandal, it's a story told out loud. Isn't a scandal, it's a story told out loud.